the whole thing that is going across some of these countries in West Africa is exactly, the roots are the same.
Yes.
Because we are engaging in a rebellion against French-sponsored injustice against our people, French exploitation, French dehumanization. And France also happens to be the hammer that is being held by the collective West to beat us down. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And I think that is where Ambazonia comes in. And as I say, the revolt in Ambazonia was a precursor to all of these revolts across West Africa.
Yep.
It's just that, if we had people in the military and we had people who had command battalions, Ambazonia battalions in the military, then we'll have like a capable military man leading our struggle. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, this thing is about fight. It's about bare knuckle fight. It's not about anything else. It's the rule of the jungle.
Thanks for joining me on Esteemed Television, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Augustine Ambe. Really, tonight I just wanted to come and catch up on what's going on in Ambazonia. But you really can't talk about what's going on in Ambazonia these days without talking about what's going on in Niger. Because what's going on in Niger is like a George Floyd moment right now in Africa. There have been a lot of coups that have happened in Africa, but none has become pivotal. None has focused the problems of Africa and its continuous colonial past or present as what is going on in Niger. So we can't just talk about Ambazonia as though the coup d'etat in Niger did not happen. But before I come to talk deeply about both the coup and Ambazonia, I want to say that, if you look at the world history, okay, we don't have Chinese who came and invaded Africa, enslaved Africans, took their land, make them start speaking their language, their religion, everything. The Chinese didn't do that. The Russians did not do that. South Americans did not do that. It is Europeans who did that. And there's a particular reason why. We had a show on this channel which talked about the doctrine of discovery.
Colonization is basically about who has been called by God to exercise stewardship over lands, especially colonized lands. Who has been called by God to exercise stewardship over lands and especially colonized lands. Okay, that is the essence of a doctrine called the doctrine of discovery, right?
Okay.
We're not going to go deep into that, but I just think we should frame it in such a way that we understand the present characteristics of colonization, the background, and because the doctrine of discovery, what it did was that it provided the spiritual, political, and legal justification of colonization, right?
What does the doctrine say?
Let us start with Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals and all the creatures that move along the ground." Right?
Yes, that's a Bible verse.
Yes. What they had conceived was that the mankind that God had created in His image was white, was male, and some people say able-bodied. That is, everything which was not white, male, and able-bodied was not a part of that mankind to govern over the earth.
So that Bible voice is not speaking to all of us, it's speaking to a very specific people.
To a group of people that philosophers and the Catholic Church at the time described as, this is what God has created in His image. You and I were not created in God's image. We're not different from the animals, the fishes, the birds, and the fowl. Right.
Wait, let me ask you a quick question. When you read that verse in Africa, or when they read it to you, were you thinking of some white guy?
No, I was thinking that was part of that mankind.
No, we thought it was about us, isn't it?
Yeah, but what they had...
And I'm sorry, I have to... Doesn't somebody reading that verse in Asia or in South America think the same? Because they are humans, and this verse is being read to them. They see... And so, I guess the point here is that every human being, quote, I have to put it in quote now because we're not humans, right? So continue, please. I think you should explain that really well.
So you see, we see it coming from the Bible, and the Catholic Church was very instrumental. There were numerous papal bulls or papal decrees that when the Europeans sent explorers on the behalf of monarchical kings and authorities to go and discover new land, the assumption was that if you go into that land, if it's quote-unquote unoccupied by a Christian male, you've discovered that land and it's your land.
No, not the assumption. They were told.
They were told,
that when you go there, and if the people were not Christians, first of all, colonize the land, and if the people were not Christians, I think they even talked about enslaving them, didn't they?
Yes, you enslave them. And so that is everything about what we're experiencing in Ambazonia, in Africa, and in other parts of the global south, as people like to say, percolates from that doctrine. It accounts for dehumanization, it accounts for mass murder, it accounts for, get this, forced assimilation. Remember your friend Paul Biya talking about trying to assimilate the Ambazonian people?
Yes.
So it is something which I think is very, very tragic, and us as Africans cannot be playing the role that the Cameroonese, that the likes of Paul Biya are playing on behalf of the white man, the French especially. And it's something that we definitely need to bring is as we go out to engage, with the good and fair-minded people of these Western nations, to try to educate them a little bit about why they need to review some of these policies and destruction that we're seeing in the part of the world that we come from.
When we were in primary school, we used to read that Mungo Park discovered Niger. And I used to think, how could somebody come and discover a place where there are human beings? And so the doctrine of discovery, and that's why that particular word discovered was used. The doctrine of discovery told Europeans that travel the world, if you meet any part of the world where the people are not Christian, kill them, enslave them, take over the land. And of course they knew that the Christian religion was a European religion, so obviously they would meet the whole world where there's no Christianity. And so that's why you hear, Christopher Columbus discovered America. No, he did not. But it was a word that was being used in order to claim what comes with it. I think lawyers can explain that better. So with this doctrine, at the time when the church was the all-powerful, even though they were wrong in many things, they were talking about a flat earth and all that kind of stuff, they were also wrong about this idea that the Europeans are the ultimate and they should go around and devastate communities around the world. And so that's what happened. And I'm going all the way back because if you don't always go to the root cause of things, you don't provide an adequate solution to it. Those who want to colonize usually want to deal with the moment. And so they will talk like, there's a coup that took over a democratically elected government. No, that's taking the story. That's saying that a thief who has your property and you caught him with the property, they want to start. The thief said, "This is my property," and they don't want you to establish that it is your property that was stolen. When you want to say, "No, this is my property which he stole," they say, "No, we don't want to hear about that. Did you just meet him holding this thing?" "Yeah, I met him holding it, so it is his." That will never bring justice. You have to always go to the root cause. And the root cause of why it is the French, the British, and all the colonial masters that invaded Africa are the same people we're dealing with today is because they were told by the Catholic Church that they have a right to come and invade us and devastate our communities. You know, somebody told me the story of how the British destroyed the kingdom of Benin and the circumstances that surrounded that takeover and the murder and the loot. It was a very sad story because it was a kingdom that was very far advanced in its technology and everything, and they devastated it. And so you wonder why today Africa is so backwards, and the same Europeans are all over the place with their military all over the place, still controlling, deciding who the presidents would be, who would not be, especially the French. You know, you can hate Adolf Hitler as much as you want, but the one thing that Adolf Hitler did that helped the rest of the world is that Adolf Hitler came and gave the Europeans a taste of their own medicine. You know, after all these devastations around the world, Adolf Hitler actually turned around and gave it to the Europeans. And that's when their power got weakened, imploded, and then Franklin Roosevelt said, "Okay, we have a Marshall Plan to rebuild rebuild Europe, but before we rebuild Europe, you must get out of this business of colonization." And everybody pulled out except the French. Taken over by the Germans during the Second World War, Charles de Gaulle said, France cannot be France without grandeur, and if they lose their African colonies, they will lose their grandeur. And so they created this fake independence where they gave the flag and remained everywhere and made all these crazy agreements, which you must have been hearing a lot of them discussed these days. I'm so happy with what has happened in Niger, because it has allowed not only Africans to tell the story, but I've watched Europeans, Americans, Indians, all people, everybody around the world using social media to tell the story of Niger. And that's why you have seen you've seen Nigeria that was going to carry foreign water in Niger and fight their wars, backing off, because that has become, like I said, a George Floyd moment in Africa, where the rest of the world is beginning to know that Africa is not backward because its people are stupid. There's a line being drawn in the sand right now, and the same tricks that foreigners have used to pit one African against another, I can't quite conclusively say that it's going to fail, but I think it's facing some difficulties right now. And I've seen a lot of people come and say, "Oh, I condemn the coup, I don't like the coup," and then after saying that, then they go ahead and say a lot of the bad things that France is doing in Niger. And the only reason why you're condemning what you call the Niger coup is because you think Niger is the one who is not legal. But let me tell you what's going on. The Niger military, which was a tool of the colonizer, has turned itself and become a tool for its own people to fight the coup, that has always been in Africa since the days of slavery, since colonization. I was watching a piece where Dr. Arikana Chihombora actually said it very well.
If you look at the previous coups, those were orchestrated by Western powers, majority, of course, orchestrated by France. They had their own intentions, in a few quite documented very well. The leaders were trying to do what was ultimately best for their people, and those leaders were assassinated. The difference between these coups are coups being led by our people. The people have spoken. The people now truly understand the issues. The people are standing up to say what has been going on is unfair, is unacceptable. It really just simply makes sense that something has got to give. There is a difference between the previous coups and these last 4 coups, especially the one in Niger. I actually, on a personal level, I feel uncomfortable even calling them coups. This is you look at a situation where people are basically desperate, where they know they're rich in natural resources, and yet the majority of the people are extremely poor. How long can that situation be sustained before the people finally wake up and rise up? That is what's happening. And I would like to call what's happening in these 4 countries as an ideological realignment of their economic, of their political, of their social values.
Putting this Bazoum guy was a coup against the people of Niger so that he can carry French water for them. So a coup against a coup is really a positive. So those who say, "Oh, I don't like coups," what Niger did is a fight back. It's not a coup. It's actually Africans fighting back effectively.
At some point, if you look at the situation with the former French colonies, before even a president comes to power, there are certain no-go areas that the president must not touch, because if you do, you may not live to see the end of the day. Areas like the military, areas like, of course, the finances and the reserves that must be deposited with the French treasury, areas of the natural resources. So if you are a president, an African president, who is coming to power, and you are told, as long as you stay away from discussions pertaining to their presence, military presence in the country, training of your military by France, equipping of your military by France, don't talk about the natural resources, whose the French companies have the first right of approval. Do not talk, and make sure you continue to deposit your bank reserves with the French central bank. If you avoid those areas, then you're free to run your country any which way you want. Now, what kind of a leader is that? What environment are you going to be occupying and managing and running your country with all those major areas of economic development no longer accessible to you? The whole thing is so mind-boggling that we have gone to, over so many years, this is 2023, that the leaders in Africa have been unable to undo the agreements that were put in place when the African countries were given their independence. It is unbelievable that to this day, you can have a country like Niger to be the second poorest country in the world, and yet all their resources are going to France. Most of Niger is not electrified, while their uranium is electrifying France and Europe. You can take one after the other after the other. At every level, it's unfair, it's unacceptable, and I don't even know how the Western powers could really go to sleep every day knowing of the carnage that the havoc they're creating in Africa, and hope that this will go on forever.
Everything that is happening today with what they call today the collective West with the European, the genesis is the doctrine of discovery. Because as that doctrine clearly stated, quoting the Bible that I did in that piece, right? Mm-hmm. That man that God was talking about to have dominion over the fish of the sea and the bird of the air was a white man. And what he saw in these other parts, whether it's in the Americas or in Africa or in Australia, were part of the wildlife, right? Mm-hmm. Who had no title to those lands that were occupied. And that's the way they still treat the Nigerians. That's the way they still treat us. So that you can go there and say, okay, because you're part of the wildlife, you do not have the mental aptitude to make the best use of these resources in your land. So we're going to take it over, because that's the word of the Lord.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I say amazing.
Yes, that's it. That is what colonialism, slavery colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism, they are all vestiges of the doctrine of discovery.
Yes.
They are all vestiges of that.
And they have internalized it and actually treated like...
Internalized it, yes. That's the bedrock of white supremacy. That's because white supremacy is because God chose the white man to be that man made in the image of God. And nobody else is that man made. It's only the white man who was made in the image of God. And they've internalized that over centuries with the doctrines, with the papal bulls and all of these things that they came and
forced on people, you know, and forced on indigenous communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, until you analyze it that way, people would still think that, it's an overthrow of a legitimate government. Legitimate government, who legitimized it?
The time has come. The children of Africa are now awoken. They can see clearly now. And they're simply standing up and saying, enough is enough. So yes, we don't like coups, but the last 4 coups are very different in the sense that the children of Africa are very clear, because they are the ones standing up and saying, we got to take back our country. We need to defend our turf. What's right is right. What is wrong is wrong. We can no longer continue to be exploited. That's what makes this different. It's not influenced by France. The coups are not influenced by any nation. It's simply people standing back and saying, we're taking back what belongs to us. And that's what makes these coups different. And I'm uncomfortable calling them coups. I'm calling them instead ideological realignment of our economic, political, and social values.
Do you think that ECOWAS putting military intervention on the table, announcing a standby force, has put a good option on the table?
I don't think it's a good option. And I would want to ask the same people who are sitting at the table having those discussions about having a military intervention in Niger. Let me remind you that there are other coups that we are not talking about, that we should be talking about. By France forcing Niger to send all its natural resources to France, that's a coup. By France having its own military in Niger and forcing Nigerians that you can only be trained by France, that is a coup. By forcing Niger to deposit 50% of its reserves with France, that is a coup. The question I have for those who are sitting on the table, during those ECOWAS meetings, during those AU peace and security meetings, what have you done about those coups? Take those 3 coups, multiply by 14, because that's what's happening in the 14 former French colonies. Those are deadly coups that have been taking place for decades. And you, ECOWAS, have done nothing about those coups.
When you hear Nigeria say, or ECOWAS say, we want to go and stop the coup and install the legitimate government or the democratically elected government, no. There's nothing legitimate or democratic in in most of the Francophone countries, because the French own everything. If you're not one of their own, you are gone overnight. If you're one of their own, if you are doing what they want you to do, then you will be in power like Paul Biya for 40 years. It doesn't matter whether you're getting to be 90 years. So who is in power in Niger is not that important. What is important is that person give access to foreigners, and that's why Niger is the poorest country in the world, and that's unacceptable. And if Nigeria and ECOWAS think about it and think past what is going on right now, then they will know that they need to be supporting the coup in Niger, and not be supporting Ouattara, because Ouattara was in there by coup. He caused another coup by scrapping the constitution that allowed him to stay in power for so he's now president for life. So there are many coups, and the coup is not just a coup that you take a gun. The constitutional coups, the economic coups, and all the types of coups that have kept Africa down.
I need them to also answer and give us remedy as to how they are going to handle those coups. Make no mistake about it. Those are coups against the African citizens in those countries. And while they discuss what they would like to do with Niger, I would also want them to table those coups and come up with a solution as to what needs to be done. Because behind those coups that I just described from France, there are millions of children who are dying from starvation. There are millions of children who are going to bed with an empty stomach. There are millions of African youth who are unemployed. There are millions of women who are dying while giving birth to another life. I need them to put that on the table as well. If their interests are truly about the Africans, let's look at the global view of the issue. Let's have a bird's eye view of the issue and have a frank and fair and honest discussion about what is really going on in Africa. I do know that I don't think the carnage that's going on in Africa is what ECOWAS is all about. Leadership is about the people. It's about creating a better life for the people. But if you're going to allow one who has committed egregious crimes in Africa continues to have coups, those are coups. Let's call a spade a spade. You can't give France a pass. So also let us know what you intend to do about those ongoing economic and political coups that are being imposed on those 14 French countries, former French colonies, by France. So to just talk about what's happening in Niger alone, in isolation, and not go to the root causes of the genesis of why what's happening is happening, simply does not make any sense. And I would hope military intervention in Niger is not an option. That simply is not something we should do as Africans. There are better ways of dealing with our issues. Our elders must come together. Our elders must have a frank conversation, and let's look at what is ultimately best for the people, not only the people in Niger, but in all former French colonies and ultimately in all African countries, because this moment is calling for unity, meaningful unity of purpose among the African leaders to simply say, guys, this can no longer continue. It simply cannot continue. The people have spoken, and I hope our leadership would listen.
I want to make sure that we understand that what is happening in Niger is the same thing that happened to the people of the Southern Cameroons. Those were people who were programmed to get their independence by law, by international law. But when it came to having their independence, the British said, nah, these people seem to be too smart. They seem to be following the smart Nkrumah. They seem to be very alert. And so they caused a coup and gave the independence of the people of Southern Cameroons to the French.
The trauma that the whole continent has gone through can only be expertly summarized in a few minutes like you have done. Because the story you're telling about Niger is the story of the entire Africa. I wouldn't belabor the point touching every nook and corner of Africa, except where we have to make some quick references.
Mm-hmm.
But let me just zoom in on the scenario. You know, colonialism was definitely followed by neocolonialism. And in neocolonialism, the blue-eyed master with they're not white people because their skin is not white. Maybe they are pink. The pink gentlemen, they withdrew, but quickly recruited Africans and then brainwashed them, processed them, and repackaged them and sent to back to their continent, not to serve the continent, but to, you know, be an agent of the devil against Africa. You cited one example, Ouattara. Ouattara, who is, you know, strictly speaking, Burkinabe, stroke Mali, was processed through the World Bank, right from school in France, processed through the World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions, and repackaged, rebranded, and sent into Côte d'Ivoire. I don't have a problem with an African choosing to go and stay in one part of Africa or the other. I have a problem but with lending themselves as a tool to the real enemy of the people in that area to be used. You can see right away that the International Court of Justice that illegally found Gbagbo guilty and arrogantly apologized by revisiting their judgment. After Ouattara had become well seated and making Gbagbo come back to Côte d'Ivoire like a prodigal son, those were all designed to take care of the situation in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. The gas pipeline, and you must understand, the entirety of Europe is heavily dependent on their energy supply on Russia. Whether it is to operate, to supply them oil for heating their houses and doing their industry and so on, running their industries, and then the supply of uranium for their nuclear reactors, is all principally from Russia. Now, the conception that the West was firmly in control of Africa might have been under the decision to blow up the North Sea oil pipeline, because agreement had been reached a long time ago for the construction of a gas pipeline from Nigeria, quote unquote, through Niger Republic up to, I think, through Algeria to the Mediterranean Sea.
Yes.
And onward to Europe.
Yes.
So the blowing up of the North Sea gas pipeline, if you look at the development now, you see that it is because there was that option. In fact, after that gas pipeline was blown, the American company Exxon accelerated the execution of the pipeline project from Nigeria. I still maintain, quote unquote, to pump gas from around the Atlantic Ocean and run it through Nigeria, Niger, and Algeria so that it could get to Europe. Now,
that's amazing.
The French have done nothing but recruited Africans and made themselves physically present at the same time for the exploitation of the natural resources. In fact, they had no shame. The Americans would even, court you around and sign contracts. The French have been primitively and brutally extracting the resources of Africa. Tax-free. In fact, they were always, like in Central African Republic, declaring a deficit. Can you imagine an oil company paying less than 20,000 francs tax for all the oil that they export? So we have a situation where it was just a matter of time where the African will say enough is enough. This is exactly what has happened with the rascally French establishment, because I must say that the majority of Europeans, the majority of Americans are not the people who are saying, let's go and exploit these Africans. It is the people who are taking the decisions. If you ask an ordinary American, what is the American foreign policy in the Gulf of Guinea? They will tell you promotion of democracy, maybe, because that's what is sung on the television, CNN, and so on and so forth.
You keeping out and human rights.
Yes, human rights. But you and I know that I'm saying this because NDI, National Democratic Institute, the catchword there is democratic. Because when you hear democratic, like they say, yes, these are people who are promoting democracy. Nonsense. The National Democratic Institute and the National Republican Institute receive their budgets from the National Endowment for Democracy. So if you drink from one dirty pot, how can you have typhoid and then the other man will not have typhoid? So let me just say this. The world is governed by the interest of groups of states that determine the tectonic movements in international geopolitics. And in recent times, you have seen how those puppets, so-called African leaders, are bundled and brought to Washington or to London. Sometimes they come there and they are made to enter buses like we used to enter Manores to go to Sasekology. But Russia too has started inviting them. China has been doing that. And China is telling them that they are telling you we are colonizing you. But mind you, the people who really colonize you through a collaboration with the Catholic Church and the King of Belgium in principle are the Europeans. They brought Christianity, forced it on you. They brought that Christianity to China and held their gun that if we do not accept, they will gun us down. But we were too many, they couldn't kill all of us. And that's why Christianity did not thrive there. But they came here, you are also numerous, but your continent is so large, so they were able to pick a few of you, kill you, take some, go to run their plantations. But look, this is wake-up hour. Niger has said, okay, France, we don't want to see your ass here. You get out. Bazoum, you don't care about our people, and we are not poor, as the statistics show, because we have wealth that is being taken for nothing, not even employment of our people. And the coup d'etat is now not being carried out by people who just grew through the rank and file. The gentleman, 34-year-old in Burkina Faso, he has a BSc in geology. That's strategic. He knows where the minerals in Burkina Faso is found. He knows what those minerals can do to develop the country. So there are lots of things, even our curriculum. These people came with the church introduced a curriculum that only helps to enslave us. It does not liberate us. Look at what is happening in America. People do certification after 3 months of induction in certain courses, and they are earning 6 figures. But the Africans who have PhD in physics, in maths, they're working in group homes, right?
Yes.
Something is fundamentally wrong with that game that is being played. So the African, thanks to the exposure through the competition between the West and the East, they have awoken. You said something about Christianity, but let me tell you something. A reverend father of the Catholic Church, who is very close to his roots and therefore understands the traditional African mythology, the belief system. The Europeans never knew anything about a supreme God. It is the Africans that started having the concept of one God, because every village believes that there's a supreme being that oversees the entire universe. But the Europeans had their small groups, like all these fellows with the Freemason, the Rosicrucian, the Illuminati. These are small groups of people who are playing around with the lower spirits. But I'm saying this. They use those things to create small groups in the African countries that also dominate us. And the spirit they are dealing with are lower spirits, because that spirit is not enough. That's why they still supply them with guns to fight their own people. But let's move away from that. You said something about Ambazonia. I can tell you this, and I've mentioned it in other circles. Ambazonia is the epicenter of international geopolitics as operates in Africa, because we are the bridge between the French-speaking Africa and the English-speaking Africa. The English, because of their craftiness, did not want to spend too much in the administration of their territories. So they empowered people through indirect rule, while the French chose direct rule. For direct rule to survive, they had to collect Africans and brainwash them and tell them that even though you are brown eye and chocolate skin, you are now a Frenchman. But the English could not rescue themselves from the racism that they conceived. So they distanced themselves and they use indirect rule, recruiting a few people to dominate their own people for their benefit. The gas we are talking about, which has to be tapped from Nigeria, I bet you that gas is going to be tapped from Bakassi, nowhere else. Because if you look at the geological map in the Gulf of Guinea, the deepest point of the trough, whether for oil or gas, is in Ambazonia. All the manipulations that led to the International Court of Justice in the land and maritime boundary case between Nigeria and Cameroon, where they saw that Ambazonia was about to collaborate with Nigeria. So they brought in Equatorial Guinea for redefinition of their territorial water boundary. These are people, when I was in class 4 in primary school in Victoria, where you stand and see Fernando Po, they were begging to be a small province of Cameroon, and Ahidjo refused. They would have been part of Cameroon. They now come and say they are defining their boundary. It was not against Cameroon because they are all Fang people. It was against Ambazonia. They came there to leverage and give an advantage to the French in they are using La République against Ambazonia. So the US policy of energy security in the Gulf of Guinea, this is the way I translate it. We must be able to control the government in all the West African countries so that they do our biddings. That is why you have a genius like Peter Obi, who won the election, but he could not enter Aso Rock. They instead took Tinubu, against whom the United States has information that is very damaging. They allowed him to go. Was the NDI not there observing the election? What is the report of the NDI about that election? He went there to do the master's game. So you have a situation where they have a Ouattara over there. But Nigeria is so populous that Equatorial Guinea is not, Ivory Coast is not good enough. They have already recruited Macky Sall in Senegal. Macky Sall, who went to power by challenging the fact that people must not extend their stay in the presidency. Now he has been trying to creep in and modify the constitution to continue because the master says we need you.
So it's not his decision, is that of the master.
Yeah, the master. It is said Tinubu received a call. Of course, in that call, they must have said, boy, you know that you didn't really win this election. So now that you're president of Ecowas, if you don't get Ecowas to go and, reinstall Bazoum in Niger Republic, we might open your file.
Why don't you just state what happened? Because my understanding is that the Vice President Kamala Harris called Tinubu. Just say that. Don't say what you imagine. But
well, you might have laid your hands on some form of evidence. But as an attorney, let me tell you, before I make a categorical statement, I should be able to, prove it concretely. So I am making this statement because it is coming out like something we can process as circumstantial evidence. But I'm glad you have brought it out. Kamala Harris was, all over the place in Africa, and she didn't go there to please the Africans. She, of course, went there to do the job of the office that she's occupying. And this could be one of those jobs. not that it could, it is one of those jobs. In fact, it is no news that the US has a drone base in Niger. The French have a military base there. The Canadians are present in Niger, where they are exploiting gold and uranium. So all these NATO members, they are doing a survival thing. Their country cannot function without the energy. So whether it is uranium for nuclear reactors or it is oil, they need it. There are more planes in the air in America than there are trained coaches. So you can imagine how much fuel they need to run those fleets of different companies in the air.
Let
me just wrap this up. Okay. Ambazonia, right from the time of commencement of decolonization, was seen as a very dangerous hub for anti-West, simply because the pro-Russian UPC, when they were, being massacred, and because we're two different nations, they ran into the then Southern Cameroon. And because the French knew the international boundary between the Republic of Cameroon and Southern Cameroon, absent any act of union, they could not cross the boundary to follow the UPC leaders there. Unfortunately for us, because Nkrumah was supporting the independence movement, Tumaza was recruited by the UPC people. And it was made clear that if he uses the name UPC, it will create problems, even though that was the agenda of the UPC leaders. So he now created the One Cameroon Party, okay. And they all got sponsored and so on to Russia and things like that. But the French did not want us for anything other than our resources, because the principal resources in the Gulf of Guinea, whether it is gold, it is diamond, it is bauxite, it's in Ambazonia. And I've had occasion to tell the American deputy head of mission in 2016 that, look, if you do not hurry up and deal with us for our liberation, you're going to have problems. Because when the whole French-speaking West Africa will start bubbling and Biafra will start bubbling, already you have Central African Republic, Congo, they are not very stable. You will not have any place to anchor. I said the same thing to the Canadians. They did nothing because they had their NATO-inspired decision that this is the way we are going to do. Ignore that young man. When he will get hungry, we will know how to handle him. Unfortunately, I had already drank cement and I don't get hungry.
When people talk about geopolitics, in the final analysis, peace doesn't come from geopolitics. It comes from justice. And you will get your justice. That's my conclusion on this. I don't know what your last word will be, but please.
For the Americans, review your policies. Discuss with us. Let us negotiate at par. I've told many Americans that even if I read my degree in law under the palm tree, I read the same principles of law and I'm able to discuss it, and I have done it in international fora very effectively. And I challenge them. I didn't study by multiple choice. Let us come to the table with humility and discuss and place our humanity above our economic position, which is even grown on a false foundation, the foundation of enslavement and exploitation of Africans. Enough is enough. Particularly the United States is a multicultural society. People should stop deceiving themselves. Africans, Ambazonians, in the diaspora, you are strangers where you are. Don't overstay your welcome. Fight for your country, restore it. Go back and invite your friends to come and visit you. I've already issued post-dated invitation to my friends, Americans, to come to my chateau in Bali and drink palm wine, not the wine with preservatives that we have here. Thank you very much.